Hello and welcome to the Ireland on the Fly podcast about the people and places of fly fishing in Ireland. No matter the fishing and conditions, the 2025 fly fishing season will go down in memory as the year of the worst ever fish kill in the history of the state, which is certainly saying something based on this country's approach to pollution, water quality and environmental protection. Up to 50,000 fish are suspected to have been killed, and this number also didn't include fry, after dead fish were spotted on the Blackwater on August 11th. Although it's believed the incident could have been up to 72 hours previous to this. With it being an interagency investigation involving the IFI and EPA, there were unnecessary delays, a lack of leadership and a questionable approach to the fish kill overall. And what's most galling is that ultimately the report recently released found no one person, body or organisation was found culpable or responsible. We've discussed fish kills on this show before, highlighting the fact that when guilty verdicts and fines are handed down, the consequences are risible anyway. But for this week's episode, we wanted to focus on the questionable practice in the Blackwater investigation and why the current legislation is not fit for purpose. Conor Arnold of the Upper Bridgetown Salmon Fishery on the Blackwater has been to the forefront during this crisis, spending untold hours highlighting the issue and trying to get to the bottom of it as best as he can. Conor also spoke as an invited witness at last week's Oireachtas committee hearing into the Blackwater fish kill, and a day later he spoke to myself and Tom about the hearing to tell us what arose from it.
Yeah, so basically all of the state bodies were brought before the Oireachtas committee to answer questions on proceedings and the investigation as a whole. Myself and John Ruby, who's the chairman of Mallow Trout Anglers, were asked to come up on board as witnesses to give our account of events. Me being the chairperson of Killavullen Angling Club, as well as having my own fishery. So we did. We gave our opening statements in line with the rest of the board as well, and we spoke about our concerns as regards protocols and procedures that were observed and the impact on us. And then we basically sat there. So our involvement was as witnesses and only to give a statement and then answer any questions put to us by the committee. So our involvement was quite small in that sense, but to be part of it, to be brought into it and to see it was an experience. I'll put it to you that way.
What was your observations and thoughts? As far as you can say.
Yeah. So the committee and the TDs and senators present were given an extremely short period of time to put their questions to the relevant bodies, and to get to the pertinent questions, you'd have to organise yourself very well, considering like this is a massive investigation into the largest fish kill in the history of the state. Okay, that's the scale of it, and for a TD or a senator to be given 6 minutes to question all the relevant bodies and get their answers. There was a secondary round, and on the secondary round they were allowed 3 minutes. So 9 minutes in total. Each individual was allowed to ask questions and have them answered. So the answers were included in that time frame as well. So it's extremely difficult for the TD to actually get to the crux of the matter.
Who were the bodies being questioned?
So the IFI had 3 members present. Marine Institute had 3 representatives present. EPA had 3 representatives present. There was myself and John Ruby, and Cork County Council attended remotely.
Right. And what's the situation then for asking questions? Do they have to be submitted beforehand, or can any TD just come in? Do you know? I'm just wondering how the whole thing works.
No, so there's a registered committee. Anyone outside of that has to be invited in to join. So we were invited in by the committee, and any other TDs or senators had to be invited in as well. So it is a limited quorum in sense. But there's also a gallery there that third parties, be it reporters or anybody else, can actually sit and observe and take notes.
Right.
Can I ask actually kind of on that, like when the time is so limited and you really can't get to the heart of the matter in such a time, what is the point of it then?
I suppose, I viewed it as a starting point. I know they said that this report last week was the final report, and actually it became apparent yesterday evening. Barry Fox said that there's going to be another report which will be the final report. The one last week wasn't actually the final report. Okay.
It was like the executive summary, was it?
I'm not sure what title you would give it. I could probably think of a few, but I'll refrain. So there will be another report. Okay. So from my point of view, as I was saying, I looked at this as a starting point to get involved. We're now involved with it. The holes and the protocol failures and procedural failures were very much highlighted, even though some of the points weren't pushed as much as I would like in some ways. But I would also admit that the IFI's hands are tied to an extent. Okay, there's certain that they're not even allowed to take samples. They're supposed to be the primary agency responsible for pollution incidents. They have the hotline set. So when they arrive on the river, their first priority is actually to find the discharge or find the source of pollution. They can't actually take samples.
Why not?
They're not allowed to take samples. It's not within the legislation. They're not allowed. Any samples that they take would not be admissible. They can't do it.
Who takes the samples then?
They have to contact the EPA.
They have to get permission.
Yeah, they have to contact the EPA to take samples from any licensed facilities. They have to contact Cork County Council or whatever county council in the area and get them on site. The Marine Institute are only involved from the fish testing point of view. And apparently when the Marine Institute were called on the 11th, the reason that they gave for not coming until the 14th was that they were too busy and something else.
Yeah. The largest fish kill in the history of this area.
That was the reason given.
Their teams were deployed on another matter. They were busy and they didn't have any further resources to deploy.
So that was one of the reasons, because I had 2 points I wanted to ask you. It was about why the delay in terms of on site. The second one was, and you might just clear this up for me, Conor, was that the samples that were taken was from a tributary only. Is that right?
Yeah, so I asked that in my opening statement, and you can go back on it. I'm sure the video will be up shortly. But I asked the question, on the 20th of August, the EPA released a statement saying there was no causal link to North Cork creameries. Would someone be able to explain to me how any facility with a track record such as their own, having multiple convictions for pollution as well as 125 non-compliance notices since March 2020, could be excluded from the investigation when further samples were only taken for residue testing on the 26th and 29th? In other words, all of the evidence had not been gathered and was not available at the time of the publication.
So to make that clear, the EPA issued that statement that the cost couldn't be levied at
the 20th of August.
Yeah,
and
the 20th of August.
Further tests on the 26th and the 29th.
So prior to full test results coming in, that statement was issued. Okay.
Correct.
That doesn't sound great now.
No, and look, this is from their own published report. I'm not making this up. I'm not sitting here. Okay? It took them 14 days to set up an interagency group to investigate the event. 14 days. Before that, any of the state bodies that were involved were operating under their own capacity and not coordinating, to the best of my knowledge. It took them 12 days to get preliminary test results suggesting that it wasn't a fungal infection as they had alluded to at the start, and that it was in fact a pollution incident or a chemical irritant in the water. I was able to source an independent EU accredited laboratory and get the same results within 24 hours. I'm a fisherman from a local angling club. I don't have the resources of the state at my disposal.
Were these points raised and put to them?
I'm reading this from my opening statement. I can't ask the questions inside at the Joint Oireachtas Committee. I'm merely there as a witness. I gave the information to the floor to ask the questions.
Yeah. And did they follow up on it?
Some of them, yes. Some of them, no. Look, some of the TDs were doing their best with a lot of questions, and they ran out of time with some of them. But they weren't answered.
Yeah, so you didn't get an answer?
No.
Well, of course, you only had 9 minutes in total to get an answer, isn't it?
Yep, correct. See, so look, I'm not making justifications for anyone, but it was a starting point.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
As I'm concerned, it's not finished. They did say the criminal investigation was closed. So the IFI said that the criminal investigation was closed, but there is still going to be another report. So I do have a meeting with IFI this evening, and I do have a few other ongoing lines that I will pursue. But suffice to say that we're not done yet.
Did you find it very frustrating then? Very unsatisfactory?
Extremely, Dara, yeah, extremely frustrating. I mean, yeah, fine, we sat there. I made a number of recommendations, okay, because like at the end of it, I said, the distressing scenes, sorry, hang on, let me get to this. Yeah, the distressing scenes of thousands of dead and dying fish in the Blackwater has outraged the community, and we demand answers and solutions. The conservation and recreational angling reputation of Ireland depends on what we do next. Okay? And the recommendations that I gave, okay, was extensive habitat restoration programs, constant water quality monitors to be strategically placed into the river, but paid for by every discharge facility as part of their EPA license criteria. These monitors need to be under the remit of a rapid response team to give one single focal point in any investigation. This system needs to be always transparent and accessible to the public. A fish counter to be installed in the lower reaches of the river to monitor returning migratory species. The removal of all commercial netting. Increased fines and other stringent stipulations on all facilities that discharge into the River Blackwater and its tributaries. And an independent inquiry to all departmental bodies involved, focusing on protocol and timelines. At the end of it, in the summation, the Cathaoirleach of the committee accepted and absolutely accepted that the whole thing was disjointed and flawed from the start. And that, as it stands, if this happened tomorrow morning anywhere else in the country, there would be the same response.
And is that part of the reason why, so basically, if things were joined up, do we think the outcome would be different from the report, i.e. we'd actually find the culprit?
Yes, would be the short answer. So in one of those recommendations, I said about these monitors to be placed in the river, strategic points, as constant water quality monitors. This is applicable anywhere. There's a company in Carlow that make these, right? So the IFI are in a sticky position. They get a phone call about a pollution incident, and straight away they're reacting rather than being proactive. So they're chasing it. They don't know where it's coming from. The likes of these monitoring and a system like that would actually flag any pollution incident far quicker than any individual out walking his dog notices dead fish. Because one of the critical factors that they've got to in the investigation is to say that the pollution incident possibly happened up to 72 hours before the first phone call came in. Okay? So if you do have a system like this in place that you're monitoring the water quality and the flag is raised straight away, first of all, you know the point source, or within fairly close proximity to it. And second of all, you're not waiting on Joe Public to actually notice it, to notify the IFI and for them to react. You're much, much quicker to react to the situation. And all relevant bodies will be on straight away. And the IFI also did say, to be fair, yesterday evening, that they have discussed the possibility of a rapid response team with Minister Dooley, and that it is being discussed with the view to starting one.
I mean, I think a very pertinent point that you brought up there, and you said if it happened again in the morning somewhere else, there probably would be no difference. Because let's say if it happened somewhere else, and what you said, the IFI go in and they actually can't take samples until they get it cleared by the EPA. So, you know, if there is something discharging into the water that they feel it came from that, they can't go ahead until they get permission. So just leading from that, when were in the Blackwater case, when were the samples actually taken? So the samples of the water that have been submitted.
So the EPA, there's a bit of a cloud over that one. The IFI claimed that they attempted to make contact on the 11th, but the EPA didn't get any contact until the 12th. I think there was a voicemail left on somebody's voice box, but they didn't get it because it was after 5 o'clock and it didn't come through the hotline, 24-hour hotline, so it was missed. Okay, So it was the 12th before the EPA actually deployed anyone, and they did take water samples on the 12th. Now, I would suggest this as well, Tom and Dara. You're both intelligent men. You do realize that a river flows in a certain direction. So if you realize that you're 24 hours or 48 hours late to the party, do you go upstream possibly to see where the point source is, or would you perhaps go downstream in the hope that you may cut it off or meet residue samples somewhere? What do you think?
Call me Sherlock, but
Who went upstream? Sorry.
So the samples were taken from Mallow Bridge upstream on the 12th.
By the EPA.
And as well, they were taken from the Clyde. Despite the Clyde, well, fair enough. I can understand the logic to the Clyde because the Clyde is the water source from Mallow Town, okay? But it was also downstream of where the point source of the pollution or the fish kill, we'll say, was starting. So you would imagine that, it started above the Clyde. It didn't come down the Clyde because the fish were dead above it.
Yeah.
So they took samples from Mallow, the Clyde, and then, if the river is flowing at an average rate of 5 miles an hour, you can calculate how far down you estimate that plume of pollution have moved. And you can act accordingly. Come on, that's not rocket science.
So the EPA, it was the EPA who went upstream.
They took the samples from Mallow and upstream Numberstown and Ruskeen, and they took samples from the discharge points of Cantor Creek and so on.
Have we heard a justification for why?
Their justification is they're only responsible for the EPA licensed facilities. Cork County Council also took water samples from Mallow, and it was later on then, further down the line, that they actually took samples on a more extensive level. So
further downstream. But even at that stage, working at the 5 mile an hour ratio. Yeah.
These are supposed to be the experts.
Yep.
Jesus.
Now, do you understand my frustration?
Did anybody surreptitiously or not take samples where they should have been taken?
So, as I said, water samples, by the time that initially we're relying on the state bodies to actually do their job, and we trusted them, and they came out then and said it was a fungal infection, and we kind of went, nope. So by the time that we actually came around to saying, right, we need to do something ourselves, it was 4 or 5 days in. So then I had to try and find labs, and I had to go through all this. I'm not a scientist or ecologist or whatever, biologist. So the time frame had elapsed for basically me to take any meaningful water samples. I did take fish samples, as I said earlier, got them tested, and it followed the same protocol as the Marine Institute would follow. As I said, it was an EU accredited laboratory. Within 10 minutes at the side of the road, the lady in question was able to tell me that there was no bacteria or pathogens present in the fish or fungus. Okay? The fungus that we saw on the fish was a secondary infection on dying and dead fish.
Yeah.
All right. It was exacerbated by the water temperatures and the conditions, but it was a secondary infection. That wasn't what was killing the fish. So that was very apparent within 10 minutes. Further down the line, I did do sediment sampling, and to the best of my knowledge, no one of the state bodies took sediment samples. Okay?
Right.
To the best of my knowledge, it wasn't declared in the report. They did microinvertebrate sampling. They did fish samples that they took for toxicology, right? So it was reported on the 11th of August. It was the 26th and the 29th of August before they took the samples of fish for toxicology. Also, in the report, it says that tissue samples from the flesh were taken. Now, again, I'd like to stress that I am not a scientist, but I am reliably informed that any residual chemicals would be in the organs, not the flesh, kidneys, the liver, or the stomach. And nowhere in the report does it say that they tested the organs.
It's a couple of thoughts on this I have, Conor, is, okay, one is, holy shit, these are the experts and people in charge, is that because because this was the biggest fish kill in history of state and it got such publicity and light was shone on it, that we're starting to actually get a kind of an insight into the inner workings of how these investigations working. So my fear and worry is about any previous fish kills that there was less light shone on, or incidents previously, that how many clusterfucks actually have been going on for so many years that we don't know about.
It's impossible to know. It's speculation. We have no idea. The only statistics that were revealed last night was by Barry Fox to say that 1 in 4 pollution events that are reported are never concluded or prosecuted. There's another thing that I actually raised. One of the first points that I raised yesterday in their own report that they published last week. They stated that up to 32,000 salmon and brown trout, plus another 10,000 of other fish species were killed in this pollution event. That does not include fry. Okay?
Right.
So, just to be clear to the floor last night, I said that fry are tiny fish that are up to 1 or 2 inches in length, that it would be virtually impossible for you to recover anyway. But with that in mind, the realistic mortality rate could run into the hundreds of thousands because the amount of small fry that are in the river, as you all know, is just...
And the future, of course, of the river, with the deaths.
That's another point. The IFI stated that it could be 3 to 4 years for the fish to return to the levels that they had been previously. Now, Tom, a brown trout in the Blackwater, you know probably even better than me, but a brown trout in Blackwater that is 6 or 7 pounds in weight is 10 or 11 years old.
Yeah.
And we took quite a lot of them out of the river. So
did you actually? Yeah.
Yeah, and we've plenty of photographs.
Yeah.
And how could you explain to me that size of fish can be replaced in 4 years? Also, the life cycle of a salmon is 3 years in the river. The volume of fish in the affected area is over 3 years. So you have 3 generations badly affected in that. The 3 generations multiplied by 3 is at least 9 years.
Decade that goes to a decade.
Yep.
And this comes back to, because I did want to say to just kind of about, it's like there's been efforts to minimize this all along, right? They had no evidence or no basis, or the basis for the fungal infection argument could have been absolutely thrown out the window within minutes, right? But yet that was the opening line, right? And myself and Tom covered it as well. Like when you read through the press releases, it's all about minimizing, it's all about downplaying it, which suggests to me, one is that's an acknowledgement of somebody's fucked up here.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ, would somebody bloody in charge know what they're doing? And that
became very apparent last night, that despite the IFI being told that they were the ones leading the investigation, they did not have, I suppose, the capacity and power to actually lead it and carry out the necessary testing and requirements involved in a fish kill like this. They were a body that was supposed to be doing it, but they didn't have the power to do what they were supposed to do.
Do you mean from a resource perspective or from a legislative perspective?
Legislative perspective. Even the resource, one man was sent to investigate it. Fine, okay, but when he got to the situation and realised the severity of it, there was no more resources drafted in from elsewhere in the country. It was left to the local IFI officers on the ground, and with the greatest of intentions in the world, there's only so much that 3 men could do. If you're having a concert in Crow Park, what do? They draft in extra security and guards. If you have a protest, they draft in extra guards and security. If you have a massive fish kill, which was apparent very early on the scale of it, do you not think you'd be able to draft in a few extra bodies from elsewhere in the country?
It sounds like there never has been a contingency plan for that at all. It sounds like that never crossed anybody's mind when they were formatting how each body works or how the IFI works. That didn't exist.
Yeah, very much so, and it was very apparent last night.
Does the legislation need to be updated or changed then to make sure that things are run properly in future?
Yeah, I think they all accepted that, and Barry Fox did say last night that Minister Dooley had written to him and that they are looking into empowering the IFI with further legislative, statutes to allow them to actually do this and react and do what they need to do. So how long that's going to take, I don't know. He did say there was 120 odd letterheads that they've been looking at for up to 7 years. So what the time frame is on the legislation coming into play and being active, I have no idea.
Oh, sorry, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by letterheads? Sorry, go on.
So they had a number of recommendations that the IFI were working on with the department that they wanted to put forward to actually facilitate the IFI to do their job.
Okay, yeah.
And like one example, I'm not sure is this part of it, but one example is that IFI are still prosecuting under legislation from 1959. If you go on social media and you have 50, 100 dead salmon at your feet with no tag, they cannot use it in court because it is not recognised as primary evidence under that legislation in 1959. Okay. So the world moves on, but the legislation hasn't. So they have been, according to IFI, they have been working on this, but the time frame that they've been working on it now is at about 7 years. So how long it's going to take, even if they treat it as the utmost priority, how long it takes to get into action, I've no idea. In the meantime, we're in the same position.
Yeah. Like, so is there a kind of a short-term contingency that they can actually do to kind of say, well, if this happens in a year's time, we don't have the legislation, but we've put this other plan in place to actually mitigate for it?
Not to the best of my knowledge.
And this is the scary thing as well, as kind of, I know myself from kind of dealings with kind of public sector in other areas, is that they run scared of the process. If you don't follow the process to the letter of the law, they don't want to know. It's almost, it's like, well, we can't do that because it's not because if we go outside the process, it's going to be null and void, and there's that kind of having to follow the cross the T's and dot the I's every single bit of the way, and that seems to be hampering it at every stage. Just as part of that updated legislation or updates on that, is there anything around the fines? Was that brought up around, the need to actually...
As I said, I brought it up in my opening statement, and to be fair, a number of the TDs did bring it up as well. Even IFI stressed it, that the fines that they're allowed to impose are so small that it's extremely, I suppose, frustrating from them as well, that they take a case, they go to the expense of the taxpayer, to be fair, and they take a case, they bring whoever to court, prosecute them successfully, and they end up with a fine that wouldn't pay the wages for the staff on the floor for the day, and they go to the court laughing. If I was in the IFI, that would be frustrating, and they did say that last night. So, it was brought up, but what can they do about it? They're relying on the government to change the legislation, which takes a lot of time.
To sum it up, in essence, the working off outdated legislation, right, which is, reflective in terms of the fines, the evidence, the resources, how to run things, while at the same time the country is developing, more pressure on resources, factories, agriculture, water, all that kind of stuff is developing apace, and fisheries legislation has basically remained static and has been left decades behind. And as a result, if something happens, A, we're not forewarned about it, which is, and these incidents are more likely to happen because of all the development of the countryside. B, if it does happen, it's not investigated properly. And C, if it is investigated, the polluter doesn't really pay and there's no real consequences for it. And this is going to keep going until maybe 5-6 years down the line when the legislation is finally updated. And in the meantime, things have continued apace. Is that roughly where we're at?
Pretty much in a nutshell. I will say this much. I did start an iDonate page to raise money there, and I would just like to thank everyone that has donated or even shared it. Some people may not be in a position to donate a few bob, but they shared it, and it has been a great success. We have raised, I think, in excess of €12,000. I am not going to wait for legislation to change. I'm going to drive on and look into these water quality monitors independently ourselves. Hopefully we will get permission to have them anchored in the river. They set up the system. I also had a conversation with Loop Tackle, I have to send them a costing, and hopefully we can get something done there for funding. If we can, that would be my short-term plan. If we can get this system in place as an early warning system to monitor the water quality in the river, that would assist us until such legislation will be passed. I hope. But that's the Blackwater. All of the other 1,199 rivers in the country are on their own.
But let this be a kind of a warning to everybody else, that, if you're on a certain other river, whether you're on the Moy, whether you're wherever, that maybe other clubs and other fisheries need to start getting together and thinking the way you're thinking, Conor.
It's quite a lot of money. I guess in one sense, we're lucky that the Blackwater is such a big catchment that there would be a facility there to raise kind of substantial money to fund this and keep funding it until such time that legislation is changed. Like, one of the aspects that I asked for there was to have as part of the EPA license criteria that any discharging facility would have to pay for water quality. If you are the one risking the pollution of the river, you should at least have to pay for the monitoring of it.
Yeah, 100%.
In a perfect world, they shouldn't be discharging anyway, because there are other means of treating the waste. But in the meantime, that's the very least that should be done.
Okay, I know frustration was a word that we've mentioned, but worried, concerned when, from what you heard or the observations from the organizations that were in attendance, in terms of their ability or their grasping at how serious this is, and how are they actually going to grasp the nettle of actually making real change?
Look, it's not up to the state bodies ever involved in the investigation to make real change. That is up to the government, essentially.
So have you got then, even through kind of off the record background conversations with TDs or whoever, have you got that sense of, do you know what, okay, they're getting this?
This has absolutely consumed my life for the last 2 months or more.
Yeah.
And every day has been something different. But as it kind of went through the investigation, and I knew quite early on that the time that was lost, we were more than likely not going to get a prosecution. So that's when I started targeting public representatives and looking down the road. And yes, correspondence has started. We're looking at different things. It's just the way that the system is set up. All of this takes time, and far too much time to react to one event. And I don't know how much time will go by before they actually get it together and put it into action.
In a perfect world, Conor, if things could happen, is it possible that the joined up thinking where, let's say, the IFI would be the primary sample takers, how quick could that possibly happen? Do you have any idea?
I don't. I don't know how long it would take that legislation to be passed. I don't know. Can you actually bring in a bylaw and get, like, you can? I know you can bring in bylaws from a fishing point of view on the river. If there's an issue with a weir, they can suspend the fishing in an area. So perhaps there's a possibility to bring in an emergency bylaw to allow a rapid response team, maybe one member of the IFI, one member of the EPA, and one member of the Marine Institute, or something like that. That you have one focal point for an investigation, and the 2 or 3 or 4 people that are involved on the ground at the time are able to do what needs to be done in the proper manner. Because we've got to the stage now, the amount of fish kills in this country over the last couple of years, it's a public health issue as well. Okay? Because as I said, the levels of burns on the fish and some of the discharge grab samples from the EPA licensed premises were so bad that you're looking at human health issues if they had used the river. We didn't get any health precautions or protocols or instructions from any of the state bodies. We were told nothing. And for a number of weeks, everybody in the community was told to stay out of the river.
This is the point I wanted to actually raise with you, Conor, and we mentioned it on the show a few times, and I think the danger with this is when it's just an angler fishing issue. That's just, it's a niche area, or it's a local community or whatever. That's just the fisherman, it's terrible. God, Jesus, that is terrible. But anyway, back on with life. That it's only when you actually make it a broader issue, which is, like you said, water quality, health and safety. You see it compared it to when you look at what was happening in the UK with the rivers and the discharge and the sewage. And it was only when they kind of made it into, everybody got together. It was about the health issue of the shit being put into the rivers in the UK that people actually, the penny dropped, and that obviously they were paid for this as well. Are you starting to get some kind of sense of breakthrough maybe in terms of, because this story was pretty big in the mainstream media, and like I said, I'm just wondering, are we at the stage yet where we're now lifting it beyond just a fish and fishing issue?
I very much hope so. Yeah, I mean, like you said, it got quite a lot of airtime, and that raised the awareness of it. It was vital in actually making people aware that it is a much bigger issue than just the fishing. That's bad enough, like, even from an economic standpoint. But the recreational side and the health issues that are involved as well, it really did bring it to light, and very acutely pointed it out that, on a national scale, you're basically looking at water quality, human drinking water quality.
Yeah. We look at it, this podcast as well. All the people we'll be talking to, they'll all be anglers, and actually they'll be concerned. And you can be guaranteed that, 99.9% of the people that listen to this podcast are anglers, and they'll be really upset. But, for something like this, it has to go beyond the anglers. It has to go to the general public, and it has to be hit home to them. And it's like you said, it's the scare of it. It's water quality. It's public health.
Yep.
Public health. And until that happens, us as anglers, we have very little hope of turning the tide.
I'd agree with you, Tom, 100%. And that's why myself and John Ruby and a number of others, we bent over backwards to make appointments with the media and get on the TV. Yeah. I'm not one for the camera. I actually like my alone time, believe it or not. But we made a point of doing it to raise it and highlight the issue and bring it to, I suppose, an awareness on a national level.
And actually, kudos to you, because you have, and I am seeing, I'm seeing them on my feeds here coming up, of it still being kept alive, and we discussed this on the show, Darren. I remember said, this is probably what is hoping that, that the story will die after a week and that's it. And we'll just move on to another story. But as I said, you mentioned about fair play to you, you've kept it alive.
Yeah, it's we just want to say, Conor, yourself, John, all the others involved, 2 months of your life have been taken now. You work, you have a job, you're a fishery owner, you're trying to run a life, and this is consuming everything. It's a thankless task with all the frustration, I suppose, and the culmination of it yesterday in terms of the Oireachtas, and you must be just going, what the hell? So well done, and all we can say is thank you. For doing it, and we'll keep highlighting it and keep raising the issues. What's next for you? Deserved break for a while?
Yeah, little bit of steelhead fishing on Friday. Heading off to the States.
Well earned.
Going over into a canyon on the Clearwater River with no phone reception. So sheer bliss.
Well, fair play to you, Conor.
Skating flies for steelhead, so not so bad.
Yeah. But then come back to when do we expect another report out?
I don't know the time frame. The IFI did say that there was one pending, but they didn't say when. There will be correspondence between us and them in the meantime, so I would imagine a couple of weeks.
Right. Keep an eye out for that then. Conor Arnold, thanks again for joining us, and enjoy the fishing and keep fighting the fight when you come back.
Do my best, lads. Thanks very much.
Our thanks to Conor for joining us on the show. And don't forget to rate, review and follow the Ireland on the Fly podcast on Apple, Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts from.
Plus, you can keep up to date on IrelandOnTheFly.com as well as on Instagram, and myself and Tom will be back with another episode about the people and places of fly fishing in Ireland.